Do you think you could survive a dinosaur? Well, let me tell you 3 quick things. First, the average human can punch with about 150 pounds of force. Second, a T-Rex could bite with the force of 12,000 pounds. That's literally the weight of a school bus crushing down on you. And third, the dinosaur that we're talking about first today, it hunted in packs and could run faster than Usain Bolt while weighing as much as a rhino. And that's just number 10 on our list of dinosaurs you have absolutely zero chance of surviving. But before we crush your dreams of being built different, hit subscribe because only 2% of you watching right now are subscribed, and you're gonna want to stick around for number 1. Trust me, it makes all the other ones look friendly. You know how in horror movies, the protagonist always says at least they hunt alone, right before discovering there's actually a whole pack? Well, meet Mapusaurus, the 40-foot long nightmare that hunted in groups. Here's the thing about Mapusaurus. Scientists discovered an entire bone bed of them together in Argentina. That's right, these 6-ton monsters were social. And if you're thinking, I could just hide from one, let me crush that dream real quick. A single Mapusaurus had a skull longer than your entire body, packed with serrated teeth the size of bananas. But wait, it gets better, or worse if you're the prey, which in this case you will be. These predators had specialized feet built for running, letting them move way faster than any human despite weighing as much as an elephant. And remember, there's never just one. Studies show they likely coordinated their attacks like modern wolves. But imagine if wolves were the size of city buses and could bite through concrete. Speaking of biting, their jaw strength was so intense that paleontologists found bite marks on the bones of titanosaurs. You know, those 100-ton sauropods that make elephants look like house cats. Your puny human bones wouldn't even count as a snack to these dinosaurs. But the scariest part, Mapusaurus had surprisingly advanced binocular vision. That means not only could they hunt in packs, but they could accurately judge distances while chasing you. So no, hiding behind that tree wouldn't help. They'd see you, coordinate with their pack members, and well, let's just say it wouldn't be a very long chase for you. The only good news is that if you encountered a pack of Mapusaurus, you probably wouldn't have time to realize how thoroughly screwed you were. But if you think pack hunting is scary, wait until you see what our next dinosaur could do on its own. Remember that clever girl from Jurassic Park? Well, the real thing was actually way worse. Forget everything Jurassic Park taught you about velociraptors. Sure, they've got the clever girl part right, but reality is actually way more terrifying. Well, these killers weren't quite as tall as the movies showed. What they lacked in height, they made up for in pure nightmare fuel. Let's talk about that famous killing claw everyone knows about. Most people think it was just for slashing. Nope, that curved 3.5-inch razor was actually a precision tool. Velociraptors didn't just slash randomly like some prehistoric Jason Voorhees. They used these hooks to lash onto prey, holding on while their other weapons went to work. And speaking of other weapons, their arms weren't the useless little T-Rex twigs you might expect. These things were basically switchblades attached to surprisingly strong muscles. Scientists found that their arm strength was comparable to modern eagles. You know, those birds that can crush bone with their grip alone. But here's where it gets really interesting. Velociraptors had a brain to body ratio similar to modern primates. So translation, they weren't just fast, they were calculating. Fossil evidence shows that they could process complex spatial information and probably even plan attacks. Oh, and remember how I mentioned they weren't as big as in the movies? That actually makes them more dangerous, not less. Their smaller size meant they could move faster, hide better, and yes, fit through doors if they had to go through them. Their speed estimates put them at around 40 miles per hour when sprinting. For comparison, Usain Bolt tops out at about 27 miles per hour. The only advantage that you would have is that they were covered in feathers, so at least when you get eviscerated, it would look fabulous. Speaking of getting torn apart, our next dinosaur took the whole bite force thing to a whole new level. Hope you weren't too attached to having bones. Because remember when you were a kid and thought T-Rex was the ultimate killing machine? Well, meet its cousin who might actually have been better at turning you into lunch. Gorgosaurus wasn't just another big theropod with anger issues. It was basically what you would get if you optimized a dinosaur specifically for murder. First off, let's address those jaws. While other dinosaurs were out there developing all sorts of fancy hunting tricks, Gorgosaurus went with the most simple approach possible, having the strongest bite force physically possible. We're talking about enough power to turn a car into a compact, about 42,000 newtons of force. For comparison, a saltwater crocodile's bite is about 16,000 newtons, and those things are already overkill. But here's where Gorgosaurus gets really unfair. Unlike its most famous cousin, the T-Rex, this thing was built for speed. Paleontologists found that his leg bones were specifically adapted for rapid pursuit, with reinforced joints that let it turn without losing momentum. Imagine a freight train that could corner like a sports car. And the real kicker, fossil evidence shows specialized muscle attachments suggesting they could actually grab and manipulate prey. So not only could it catch you, but it could literally hold you in place while those bone-crushing jaws went to work. And just to make sure you're thoroughly terrified, they had surprisingly advanced sensory abilities. Their brain cavity shows enlarged olfactory bulbs, meaning they could smell prey from literally miles away. Plus, their eye sockets suggest binocular vision on par with modern eagles. So yeah, you couldn't outrun it, you couldn't hide from it, and you couldn't fight back. But hey, at least it would be over quick. Those jaws were actually efficient enough to cause instant death. How thoughtful of it. But if you think size is what makes a dinosaur deadly, our next entry is about to change your mind. Sometimes the worst things come in small packages. Oh look, it's just a chicken-sized dinosaur. How cute. Famous last words right there. Compsognathus or Compy might be the smallest dinosaur on our list, but it's basically what would happen if you combined a velociraptor's attitude with a piranha's appetite, then gave it the speed of a cheetah. Let's talk about why size definitely doesn't matter here. These little terrors had a few tricks that would make your day go from bad to worse real quick. For starters, they hunted in groups, and not just small groups either. Fossil evidence suggests they moved in packs of dozens, maybe even hundreds. Imagine being swarmed by 100 prehistoric murder chickens, each one running at least 40 miles per hour. But here's the really messed up part. Their teeth weren't just sharp, they were specifically designed for efficiency. Each tooth curved backward at exactly 2/3 of its height, creating what scientists call the perfect grip and rip mechanism. Translation: once they bit down, that flesh wasn't coming loose until they wanted it to. And if you're thinking, I'll just kick them away, good luck with that. These guys had some of the strongest leg bones proportional to their size of any dinosaur we've ever found. They could literally bounce off trees, rocks, or whatever you tried to hide behind parkour style. We know this because their leg structure is surprisingly similar to modern parkour athletes, just so you know, with more teeth. That's a joke, obviously, but they were really good at parkour. The worst part, they were smart, like really smart. Their brain to body ratio was off the charts, suggesting they could problem solve on the fly. So while you're trying to figure out how to escape, they're already 3 steps ahead of you, coordinating with their pack to cut off your escape routes. At least with the bigger dinosaurs, you'd be dead before you knew what hit you. They'd take their time, death by 1,000 bites, but make it Jurassic. Speaking of coordinated attacks though, wait until you hear about our next dinosaur. Imagine if someone took everything terrifying about the Compy and scaled it up to the size of a building. Forget what you saw in Jurassic Park. No, Dilophosaurus didn't spit venom, and it didn't have that fancy neck frill. But before you breathe a sigh of relief, let me tell you why the real thing was actually worse. This 20-foot long early Jurassic killer was basically what you would get if you asked evolution to design the perfect slasher movie villain. Here's the thing about being one of the first large predatory dinosaurs. You get to write the rules, and Dilophosaurus wrote a whole horror movie screenplay. Those distinctive double crests on its head, they weren't just for show. Recent studies suggest they were actually reinforced impact weapons. Think of it like a biological battering ram that could crack bones on impact. But that's not even the creepy part. Dilophosaurus had something most other predatory dinosaurs didn't: uniquely flexible wrist joints. Doesn't sound scary, right? Well, this meant it could grab and manipulate prey with surgical precision. We're talking about a dinosaur that could literally hold you down while it worked. And those arms weren't just for grabbing. Fossil evidence shows specialized muscle attachments suggesting that they could twist and tear like a human's could. And the real nightmare fuel comes from their hunting strategy. Unlike later predators that relied on pure bite force, Dilophosaurus used what paleontologists call slash and bleed tactics. Their long curved teeth were designed for creating deep bleeding wounds rather than crushing bones. They'd slash their prey, then follow it until it weakened from blood loss. And just to make it extra unfair, they had some of the best night vision of any early dinosaur. Those huge eye sockets weren't just for looks, they contained massive eyes adapted for hunting in low light. So no, hiding in the dark wasn't gonna save you. So while it couldn't spit venom like in the movies, the reality is much worse. It didn't need to. It would just follow you patiently until you couldn't run anymore. But if you think that's a bad way to go, wait until you meet what I like to call the freight train with teeth. And trust me, this next one gives a whole new meaning to the word unstoppable. You know how every action movie has that one unstoppable force that just keeps coming? Well, Torvosaurus was basically that, but worse, because this 33-foot walking tank had something most other giant predators didn't: actual working arms. And trust me, that's way more terrifying than it sounds. Let's break down why this particular dinosaur was basically nature's way of saying nope. Most large predatory dinosaurs followed a simple formula: big head, big teeth, tiny arms. But Torvosaurus, this overachiever, decided to be good at everything. These arms weren't just decorative. They were powered by muscles that could bench press a car. Fossil evidence shows grip strength that would make a gorilla jealous. But here's where it gets really unfair for you. Torvosaurus had what scientists call distributed lethality. That's a fancy way of saying every part of this thing could kill you. Those massive feet, reinforced toe bones for explosive acceleration. That tail, specialized vertebrae for whip-like strikes. Even its skull was built different, with stress-bearing structures that let it use its head like a battering ram. And just to make sure you're thoroughly terrified, this thing hunted across 2 continents. That's right, we found Torvosaurus fossils in both North America and Europe, meaning it was so good at killing things, it became a successful apex predator on multiple continents. The only other predators that managed that kind of range were literally thousands of times smaller. And we're one of them, just for the record. But the scariest part about this dinosaur, recent studies of its brain case showed enlarged cerebral regions associated with problem-solving thinking. Translation, this wasn't just some mindless, brutish killing machine. It could learn, adapt, and worst of all, remember. If you somehow survived a first encounter, which you wouldn't, it would do better next time. It is so smart that it can adapt and overcome problems it makes. That's scary on a giant murder machine. At least most predators give you the dignity of dying to either their arms or their teeth. This one, it had a whole menu of ways to ruin your day. But if you think being attacked is bad, wait and see what happens when you're the one doing the attacking. Our next dinosaur turned defense into an art form. And by art form, I mean turning attackers into little gooey paste on the floor. Have you ever played a video game where you encounter that one enemy with maxed out defense stats? Well, meet the Ankylosaurus, nature's version of a tank build with cheat codes enabled. But unlike your typical gaming tank, this 26-foot long fortress didn't just absorb damage, it gave it right back with interest on that loan. Here's the thing about Ankylosaurus that most people miss. That armor wasn't just for defense. We're talking about bone plates literally fused into its skin, layered like medieval armor, but better engineered. Scientists studying these plates found they were arranged in a way that could deflect attacks at specific angles, kind of like modern tank armor. Even T-Rex teeth couldn't punch through this defense system. But the real party trick this dino had, it was that tail club. Imagine a wrecking ball made of solid bone, powered by muscles that could generate the same force as a monster truck impact. Recent studies showed that this club could swing at speeds of over 45 miles per hour, creating an impact force strong enough to shatter the leg bones of any predator dumb enough to pick a fight. And here's where it gets really interesting. Ankylosaurus had surprisingly advanced blood vessel structures in its armor. This means it could regulate its temperature like a living tank, preventing overheating during combat. So no, you couldn't just wait for it to tire out and then knock it over and eat it. It was literally built for endurance battles. And the craziest part, those tiny eyes weren't a weakness. They were protected by bone rings so thick that even direct hits couldn't reach them. Plus, its brain was encased in a skull so dense, just like my own, paleontologists initially thought they were looking at a rock. This thing was literally concussion proof. So your options were attack from the front, meet the headbutt. Attack from the sides, enjoy the armor. Attack from behind, say hello to the club. Maybe try asking nicely if it'll let you live. That's pretty much your only strategy here. But speaking of dinosaurs that turned defense into offense, our next dinosaur took a different approach. Instead of armor, it went with the best defense is a good offense strategy, and boy did it commit to that philosophy. But it's a plant eater, yeah, and hippos eat plants too. Doesn't stop them from being one of the deadliest animals in Africa. Stegosaurus took that energy and cranked it up to prehistoric levels. This 30-foot long walking Swiss Army knife didn't just defend itself, it turned combat into its own art form. Let's start with those iconic back plates, because they're way more metal than you think. While scientists used to believe they were just for show or temperature control, new evidence suggests that they were basically early warning systems. These plates were packed with blood vessels and nerve endings so sensitive they could detect movement from behind. Imagine having built-in motion sensors that could spot anything trying to sneak up on you. But those plates were just the opening act. The real showstopper is what paleontologists call the thagomizer. Yes, that's actually the scientific term for its tail spikes. Those 4 massive spikes weren't just sharp. They were specifically engineered for maximum damage. Each spike could pivot slightly on impact, creating wounds that were nearly impossible to heal. Imagine being stabbed by a giant knife and then that thing stabbing you twists its knife while it's in you. That's what this is like. But here's where evolution got really creative. Stegosaurus had a specialized hip structure that let it swing that tail in a perfect arc, basically like a prehistoric golf pro, but instead of hitting balls, it was shattering bones. Computer models show it could swing these spikes with enough force to punch through the hide of any predator of its time. And just to make things extra unfair, despite weighing as much as a school bus, this thing could pivot on a dime. Those short front legs everyone makes fun of, they actually gave it the turning abilities of a sports car. You couldn't even circle strafe this thing like it was a video game boss. The only weak spot was its famously tiny brain, but good luck getting past the motion sensors, armor plates, and bone-crushing tail spikes to reach it. It's like saying a tank's weak spot is the driver. Technically true, but completely unhelpful because you're not getting to that. But if you think the Stegosaurus is intimidating, our next dinosaur makes the Stegosaurus look like a peaceful negotiator. When this dinosaur evolved, it didn't just bring horns to a tail fight, it brought the whole armory. Remember how everyone thinks rhinos are just prehistoric tanks? Well, Triceratops looked at rhinos and said, hold my extinction level beer. This 30-foot long, 12-ton absolute unit wasn't just built for defense. It was engineered to turn any fight into a very bad day for whatever was dumb enough to challenge it. Let's talk about those horns, because they're not what you think. Most people assume they were just pointy sticks on its face, but recent studies of the horn core structure show something way more terrifying. These weren't just solid bone. They had shock-absorbing internal structures similar to modern ram horns. Translation, they were literally designed to survive multiple high-speed impacts without breaking. But here's the part that keeps paleontologists and the T-Rex up at night. Triceratops had a bite force that could rival industrial hydraulic presses. Those weird looking beaks weren't just for munching plants. They could exert enough pressure to crush small boulders. We know this because we found processed rocks in fossilized Triceratops droppings. Yeah, this thing ate rocks for breakfast. Imagine what it could do to you. And that famous neck frill, turns out it wasn't just armor. It was anchored to some of the strongest neck muscles ever evolved. Computer models show these muscles could generate enough torque to flip a car. Combined with those shock absorbing horns, you're basically looking at a biological battering ram that could bench press a T-Rex. And the scariest part, they were social animals with surprisingly complex behavior. Fossil evidence shows they could coordinate in groups, using their massive bodies to form defensive walls while their horns faced outwards. Picture a prehistoric military formation, but every soldier weighs as much as a dump truck. So yeah, your options were face the horns, deal with the beak that treats rocks like potato chips, or try to get past the living shield wall of its family. Yeah, that's not gonna work. So maybe you gotta try befriending it with some nice ferns. So the next time someone says that they're built different or they could take on a dinosaur, just remember, we're talking about creatures that ruled the earth for 165 million years. The most advanced weapon you've got is probably a smartphone. And I've got bad news for you. None of these dinosaurs were afraid of getting ratioed on Twitter. But I invite you to think about this. If you had access to any weapon, do you think you could take on these dinosaurs? I want to know exactly how you would do it for each dinosaur down in the comments below. And while you're doing that, make sure to like the video and subscribe. If you want to watch more videos about dinosaurs you definitely would not survive, click the video on screen now.